Do you think that Israeli soldiers are murdering Palestinians, deliberately murdering civilians, individual soldiers, not the army as a collective?
Yeah. There's a strong case to be made. I don't. Let me make it clear. I don't think Israeli airstrikes are deliberately targeting civilians. I think they're targeting infrastructure that might be somehow connected to Hamas. I think they know that civilians are going to be killed, and there's a by and large a disregard for life that is lost. There's a level of disproportionality that. Yeah.
I don't think there is a disregard at all. If you're in an armed conflict, the worst thing you can do is give away your competitive advantages. So the element of surprise, where you're going to hit, how you're going to hit an area. And so if you cast your mind back to the beginning of the conflict, the beginning of October, Israel took weeks warning the residents of Gaza City to move south. We've all seen the videos of the IDF dropping flyer after flyer, thousands and thousands and thousands of flyers warning the civilians to leave, that there was going to be a ground incursion, there was going to be an aerial bombardment at a scale that Gaza City had not seen before. Now, this wasn't because Israel was bloodthirsty and, as you framed it, out for vengeance. This was because Israel had suffered the worst attack in a single day in terms of civilian casualties that it has ever experienced since 40 years, in fact, the War of Independence. It was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So Israel is directly responding to this threat. It then spent a huge amount of time and putting its own people, the citizens of Israel, and its own soldiers at risk by telling Hamas effectively, we're coming to Gaza. Now, Israel had no choice but to go to Gaza City because Hamas had fortified the city. They had a labyrinth of tunnels under Gaza, over 500 kilometers, placing their civilians above them and using those civilians as human shields. As the IDF warned civilians to leave, Hamas warned them if they would leave, there would be consequences. There are countless videos online of Palestinian residents saying they can't leave because Hamas, not Israel, Hamas are shooting them when they try to leave via the corridors that Israel had created, the evacuation corridor. And none of this is the action of a government that, as you say, does not care about civilian life. If it did not care about civilian life, it would do what every other military does when they engage in combat. And it would not want civilians to leave. It would not create go to the extreme lengths that Israel went to preserve civilian life. The Israelis abided by the Geneva Convention. They established safe zones, which Hamas in turn turned into unsafe zones by firing upon Israeli positions. Each and every time, it was Hamas that was bringing and drawing the fire on the area where the civilians were settling, whether it was Gaza City, whether it was Khan Yunis. These were places which Hamas are open about. Hamas are explicit with what they're doing. I'll go to quote if we need to. Khaled Mashal, various Palestinian or Hamas leaders explicitly saying that they've built the tunnels to protect the fighters, that the Palestinians, the civilians should sacrifice their lives, etc. And all of your argument removed all of that context and just placed Israelis as bloodthirsty, out for vengeance, indiscriminately killing Palestinians in some sadistic, genocidal type approach. It's not what we see. I would challenge you to point out any military that's done anything remotely equivalent or comparable to what Israel did in trying to preserve civilian life when engaging in such a densely populated civilian area.
Sure. So first of all, I'm not going to disagree with you on the point that Hamas is complicit in the deaths of thousands of civilians. They embed their infrastructure within civilian infrastructure, which makes it impossible for Israel to strike Hamas without killing civilians, right? So I don't think we have a disagreement there, but Israel, knowing this, then has a choice for how to act, okay? And the choice in how they act, I think, is certainly open for global condemnation, as we're seeing. And it's not anti-Semitism, as many would suggest. So taking measures like leaflets, that's true, they didn't have to do that. But it's almost like saying, let's just zoom out and give like a different example, because sometimes it's easier to understand it if we use like a more trivial example that's we're not as emotionally tied to. But let's say you have an example of police brutality And then they'll be like, yeah, but in the police force, what we do is we have this protocol. We try to minimize harm, but then you have a video clearly of police brutalizing people. Just because there are measures taken does not absolve Israel of responsibility. And it doesn't mean that they are not in other regards acting excessively. So they had everybody move south, right? And then they started bombing the south, right? They didn't have them move north. They just started bombing the south shortly after. Cutting off food and water in Gaza is also creating a humanitarian crisis. I get it. They want to put pressure on Hamas to come to the negotiating table. But again, this is a conscious decision Israel's taking, which is causing immense harm to civilians. Also, you could bomb Gaza. That doesn't mean you need to bomb hospitals. It doesn't mean you need to level full neighborhoods. So just because they've taken some actions to reduce harm doesn't mean it absolves them from their responsibility. And again, when we look at the numbers, it seems like around 90% have been civilian deaths. So Israel's goal is to defeat Hamas. But if they know that airstrikes are overwhelmingly killing civilians, is the military gain they are achieving from these airstrikes worth the death toll to civilians? I don't think it's a radical position to say absolutely not. And again, maybe a lot of this comes down to how much we decide to value Palestinian life. I think most people who view this through a lens of humanism would say, I don't accept that level of sacrifice of civilian life. If you're Israeli and you're furious, or if you're going to value Jewish life significantly more than Palestinian life, I think you could reach a conclusion. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Civilians will die. We have a goal. This international outcry, and even outcry called from an Israeli Jew like myself, is perfectly legitimate. Numbers show they are, and it's unclear if we're even going to achieve the goal of defeating Hamas. I think we have a very long way to go, not to mention we have soldiers dying every single day, and who knows how many more months to years before we achieve a goal. And it's not even clear what our strategy is long-term in Gaza. So it seems like we're causing a whole lot of death, a whole lot of destruction without a clear end goal. And this global condemnation is perfectly justified in my opinion. And let me just give one more example. Remember when Israel blew up the parliament building that they controlled? They took over the parliament building and then demolished it. What was the purpose of that? That wasn't used for terrorist activities. Israel was in control of it, right? So they're clearly destroying infrastructure that they don't have to. The parliament is going to be needed after the war is over. But again, so there's this sense, let's show Israelis that we are protecting them, that we are getting Gaza back for what they did. And the polling supports this, right? 50-something% support the level of attacks in Gaza, and another 20% think we're not hitting Gaza strong enough. The Israeli population, they want to see this force. They want to feel like there's reprisal for these attacks. And this is a lot of where this level of force is coming from.